did.
Let me go!
History is written in blood. There's no help for you.
Writer-director Thomas Walton brings us Room 9, a 2021 horror thriller that stars genre favourites Scout Taylor-Compton, Kane Hodder and Michael Berryman. Now, I would say arguably this is more of a thriller than a horror movie. We do have a masked killer, but it kind of plays more like a crime drama in a way. The start of the story is 40 years in the past, and we see a murder of a couple by a group of individuals for unknown reasons. Cut to 40 years later, and some of the people who were involved in this crime 40 years ago are getting murdered, and even people who are related to them are getting murdered by an assailant. Could this be to do with the crime from the past? Well, you will have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss what works in this movie's favour. Now, probably the biggest draw here is going to be those horror icons. Michael Berryman, Kane Hodder, Scout Taylor-Compton, to be fair, has garnered quite a resume in regards to horror movies these days. So there's definitely some people who may be interested to check out these guys' work here, and I think they use them in an interesting way because there isn't really a main character in this film. It's almost treated like different people turn up at different points through the movie. So the initial part of the movie, we have Michael Berryman's character, who kind of takes place, his scenes about 40 years ago. He's kind of his scenes all in the past, so to speak. But then we have the second act, where we're introduced to Kane Hodder's character, who has been in prison for the last 20 odd years, I think they say, and he's now released as Kane Hodder. And then we get Scout Taylor-Compton in the kind of the final act as a kind of relation to these people. But there's also a few others peppered in as well, but they're certainly recognisable names. But I thought it was an interesting idea to kind of feather these kind of named stars out. So we have a recognisable named actor in each of the kind of three acts of this kind of movie, really. You know, it means you don't get as much, they don't get a huge amount of screen time each. They're in a relatively short amount of running time, but it means you are having seen a kind of famous person at least in the three acts of the movie. There's a couple of kind of like other character actors here that I think you'll recognise, but they're the kind of certainly the three biggest names. Now, you're going to see a lot of negativity about this movie if you are going to have a look online, and I understand that negativity, and I'm going to talk about it in a minute. But I do think if you have watched the film as a whole, and one of my critiques is going to address that, I don't think there is some bad acting from some of the cast. I think some of the cast actually do an okay job with some of the actual performances here. I don't think the script makes a whole lot of sense, so maybe the dialogue and the kind of what they're saying doesn't make sense, but the performances are not bad. So I think you have to give credit where credit is due. The kind of the way the actors are delivering the lines, I think, is a believable performance, at least for some of them. So there is that. I think this movie does have an interesting idea. It's kind of like a family feud movie where a member of a family ultimately takes the kind of the guise of like a boogeyman. And we've seen it in horror films before, but I didn't mind the premise in a way. It's delivered not very well, but when you watch the film as a whole, it makes more sense. But you have to get through the whole movie. Again, I'll come on to that. So the plot here, once it's all said and done, I don't think it has some interesting ideas at least. The execution, we'll go on to it. But yeah, But there's kind of some you know, there's some interesting ideas. And for a low budget movie, there is a couple of reasonable gore shots here. I won't go into saying who dies and stuff, but yeah, nonetheless, there's a couple of practically achieved gore shots here. For the budget, I think was fair. And also, I guess, when you watch the plot as a whole, the movie does offer some moral complexity in regards to motivations. But let's talk about motivations, because will you be motivated to sit through this movie? Herein lies the problem. This movie doesn't really make any sense until you finish it, because it just seems like a bunch of random scenes strung together for no particular reason when you are first watching it. In particular, the first act of this movie. So the first 30 minutes or so, it's almost incomprehensible. Now, I presume the idea here was to have this reveal at the end of the movie and think, aha, this is what you've been watching and this is why people are doing certain things. But when you are watching, you're thinking, I just don't know what I'm watching. It's like a load of random scenes just thrown together in a blender and getting spewed out. Someone's killing someone else. We don't know why. We don't know who these people are, how they relate to each other. There's dialogue that makes it sound like they are, you know, knowing each other, but you don't really know. And it's just a confusing mess of a film. And then you get this second act and you kind of think, okay, Kane Hodder's a new character, let's try and take it on from his point of view. And it makes a little bit more sense, but still not completely. It's only until you get to the last act, which involves the Scout Taylor-Compton character, that we get the kind of the full story. But let's talk about that full story and how it is delivered. It is another exposition dump, delivered by a big old monologue by one of the characters. It's just like, man, this is how you tell the story. So the film has been a confusing mess of a plot right up until this point. And I'll be honest with you, I considered turning this one off. I thought, I don't know what I'm watching. And I thought, man, I've watched half of it by now. Let me just crack on and watch the rest of it. But gone back and having a look at some of the kind of the user reviews, it's clear that some people just have given up on this movie. And that's the problem. This decision here to leave any type of answers until the last minute is there's no motivation for you to watch this film, and you know, because you just don't know what you're watching, and therefore you're not connecting to the characters because you're not really on them in their plight. You're just watching like a bunch of random kind of scenes, and you know there's something's going on. I think, have I missed something? You haven't. It hasn't been told to you properly. So yeah, it's kind of a real chore to sit through. And then we've got to talk about the artistry of this movie. This film has elements where our writer-director has decided to, you know, obscure the camera, have like fake digital effects, scratches, kind of like weird sound effects like distortions on the camera to try and give it somewhat of a kind of grindhouse, gritty, grungy feel to it. And it's just, it adds to the what the hell am I watching, because this is clearly not an old film. It's like, why is it like so, just going through it so much? I mean, it calms down after the first act a little bit, but it's just, it doesn't help. It doesn't help this movie. It doesn't bring anything to it. I think it's meant to get across some of the age of the crimes that have taken place, but it seems to do it in other elements as well, which just, it wasn't a good move to do that. Now, I've mentioned I like some of the performances, but some of them aren't all that good, let me just say. So there are certainly a mixed bag. I mean, you get what you pay for when you get more seasoned actors, that's for sure, but some of the smaller parts, maybe not so good. And then the script as well, like I've said, the dialogue here, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And even when, without spoiling anything here, even when the plot is all revealed, right, you think, that's the motivation? I'm thinking, why would someone do what is done in the film for this minor motivation. It doesn't really make any sense. And thinking, okay, that's the kind of the motivation that they've gone with. This is the inciting incident, and it's just like, why would people do that? Why would people risk doing things like murder for such a flimsy reason? Oh boy, you know. So I think the idea of these kind of families at war, I think, could have been an interesting take. And certainly one family is victimising another initially, and then another family is victimising someone else later on. An interesting idea. You've got these veteran actors, or at least cult movie actors, pop up, probably a couple of days' work each, if that. But why do they spread them over the movie? But the rest of it is just poorly put together. It's such a poorly put together film that it won't hold your interest. It will not hold your interest, and that is the general feedback that I've seen from this film. But it does make sense kind of once you do watch the film as a whole, but I question how many people will do that. Overall, I think unfortunately the negatives far outweigh the positives in this film. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. There's probably a good idea in there, but it just is executed in such a poor way that it's somewhat of an unwatchable film in some ways, unless you just want to watch it to check out your favourite cult movie stars. So for me, 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to you next time.